Today's April 21st, 2012, and we're talking with George M. DeRosa, who is past commander and past trustee of American Legion Post 162. We're going to talk about George's experiences in the U.S. Navy and how they affected his life. Hello, George.
Good morning.
Good morning. George, could you tell us a little bit of your personal background, where and when you were born, and about your family?
I was born in a New York foundling, and about the age of 7 moved to Astoria, which is in Queens County, one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, and grew up in Astoria, went to the local St. Joseph's Parochial School, and then to William Cullen Bryant High School in Long Island City.
Okay. And what year were you born?
1931.
Which put you at an age
A very young 81.
Young 81, God bless you. After graduating high school, you went in the Navy. Could you tell me how you went in the Navy and what led to you going in the Navy?
Well, the Korean War broke out in 1950, and the draft started. My brother was drafted into the Army and served in Japan as a cook. My father enlisted in the Navy in World War II with a wife and 4 kids. He was that patriotic.
Wow.
So that was my inspiration to want to go into the Navy. So I enlisted in the Navy, and I was waiting to be called. And I get my draft notice. So I can remember having to go down to the draft board with my father, and they had to plead my case. He already enlisted. And fortunately, they accepted that. That was February of '51. And in June of '51, I went to boot camp in Bainbridge, Maryland.
And how long were you in boot camp?
I think it was 8 weeks. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you get out of boot camp, what was your rank?
Seaman apprentice.
Seaman apprentice. Okay.
Seaman recruit, seaman apprentice. It's a couple of years ago. I don't.
Okay. And then what were you assigned to do after boot camp?
Well, I had even though I graduated from high school with an academic diploma, I had no skills to go to any of the schools. So, so I was assigned to the AGB-3, and it was DeRosa, Diaz, Dyberg, and Desmond, who were in the same boot company, 132, were assigned to this USS Atka AGB-3. The chiefs on the base didn't know what an AGB was. One would say it's an auxiliary gunboat, operates out of the rivers of South America. Boy, that sounds like great duty. Turns out to be an auxiliary glacier breaker, a Navy icebreaker, and my home port for 2 years was out of Boston. So that was my first venture. Like a lot of Navy guys, we would like to have been assigned to an aircraft carrier to do multiple 6-month tours in the Mediterranean, but I was not so lucky.
George, tell me a little bit about an AGB. How big of a ship approximately is it?
It's about 300 feet long. It's different from most Navy ships in that it has a very wide beam and it has no keel. The purpose of an icebreaker is to go through ice fields. So you needed weight. She was 1-inch thick steel hull, unlike other Navy ships, extremely wide, and avoid port and starboard huge voids that could transfer thousands of gallons of water in seconds from port to starboard should you get caught in an ice field or ice pack, so you can back your way out. And the complement of the ship was about 300 men, including officers. And I was assigned, since I had no particular skills, MOS, to the deck force. So I was a deck ape, 1st Division, which was my job, getting up at 5:45 in the morning, because we had a chief would come down 15 minutes before reveille with a billy stick and do this on a garbage can, and I couldn't take that. So I got into the habit of taking a shower at night and getting up before he came down. And before chow down, before breakfast, our job was to swab down the decks outside, and we would hope that it was above 32 degrees. Below 32 degrees, otherwise it would freeze. So, but primarily I would chip, rust, red lead, paint, chip, rust, red lead, paint. And the nature of an icebreaker not having a keel and a football bottom, she rolled. She rolled normally 25 degrees in the North Atlantic. It's not even a storm. The nature of a deck ape really did not appeal to me, so the opening came to strike for a storekeeper, and I went into became a storekeeper.
Could you explain what a storekeeper is and what they do?
Well, aboard ship, you've got 300 men, so you need provisions. You need food, you need clothing, you need hardware, you need airplane parts for the helicopter. And my first job as a storekeeper was I was Jack of the Dust. And that's the guy who had all the keys to all of the food lockers and the reefers. And our job was to go down into the reefers and bring up supplies to the cooks so that they can cook the mess meals. You graduate into GSK or provisions or clothing, and based on my background as a young kid working in retail stores, stock and sales, it was almost unnatural for me to get into the supply department, and that stood me well my whole 4 years.
Mm-hmm. What was life like on the AGB? Where did you routinely go? How long were you out at sea, and what was it like?
Well, life on an icebreaker, we would do at least 2 tours north. By north for us was Greenland. It almost became our second base, Nassau, Greenland. And the purpose of the icebreaker was to bring supply ships through the ice fields. And these supply ships would replenish the Air Force Base, Thule Air Force Base in northern Greenland. She did not ride well. A lot of us got seasick until you get your sea legs. You almost used to pray to get into an ice field, because then the ship would steady and you could eat and shower and sleep. But I'm reflecting back to the North Atlantic, where we ran into a storm, and the North Atlantic is always heavy weather, but for an icebreaker it's even more. But the icebreaker, because of that football bottom, I was still on the deck force then, up in the bridge messenger between 2 stanchions, and she did a 59-degree roll. And everybody broke out the rosary beads. Is she going to come back? Is she going to come back? Unfortunately, she came back, obviously. But all hell broke loose aboard ship, even though things were battened down. Stuff was coming off the walls, and a couple of guys got hurt, broken bones, but I was fortunate where I was stationed.
You mentioned when that happened, you looked at the captain.
Yeah, the captain was obviously on the bridge here in the captain's chair, and his face turned white. And when the captain's face, that affects a young boot. It affected us even more. But getting into the ice field was great. Oh, by the way, another event was going north in the ice field. The noise of the icebreaker going through the ice, if you can imagine, I can't describe the noise, but very loud. But you didn't mind it because you could eat. You could sit down at the mess table and eat a decent meal. Take a shower, have a decent night's sleep. And our job again was to bring these supply ships through the ice fields to Greenland.
Now you went above the Arctic Circle?
Oh, yes.
And is there a ceremony of doing that similar to going across the equator?
Yeah.
Would you like to share that?
Yeah, I guess all the Navy, if you cross the equator, there's initiation. And if you cross the circles, the Arctic Circle or the Antarctic Circle, there's also an initiation, which was funny to watch, not funny to participate, but you had to go through it. You were blue-nosed and you became I forget what the other term was, when you go across the Arctic, and they paint your nose with a blue paint, and you go through the paddling line, and you have to go through this like a stockade, and they take off your shoes and socks, and it's electrically charged, and they pour water on the bottom, and the guy would hit the button, and we would all laugh, except if you were the guy in the stockade. But everybody had to do that, including the captain. They all had to go through that initiation.
I think that today that might be determined to be torture.
I think today it probably would not be allowed.
Yeah. You'd mentioned also about Liberty. Up in the Arctic area, it was very isolated. What did you do for Liberty?
Well, obviously in the Arctic there's no Liberty ports, as you would call them. So the captain or the boatswain's mate would put us in the LSVP and take us to the base of an ice cap. and you could buy up to 3 bottles of beer for 10 cents. Yeah, there's no cans then. 3 bottles of beer, 10 cents a bottle, and you go on the ice cap, and that was liberty up there. But the captain saw guys coming back drunk, and he couldn't imagine on 3 bottles of beer. Well, being in the supply department, we had the control of the beer. We brought it ashore, and we could probably be court-martialed today, but you could sell the bottles like for $1 a bottle, $5 a bottle. So the guys who weren't drinking were selling this to the other. And the guys coming back in the LSVP, the captain couldn't understand what the exec, Terrio couldn't understand. They had to lower a cargo net. Some of these guys are so drunk. Put them in the cargo net and bring them aboard ship. That was liberty in the Arctic.
And what were living conditions like on aboard ship? You had racks or hammocks, or?
We had racks because it was an icebreaker with, with bars.
Mm-hmm.
And more than one night, you had a strap like a car belt, seatbelt, strap yourself in because of the rolling of the ship. And I mean, fortunately, you had heat. But I'm also reflecting on the time that the one serious mishap we had was the boilers blew up. And the boiler makes fresh water and heat. And so for 5 days, we had no heat and no hot water. So for 5 days, similar to Vinny's situation, we ate nothing but sandwiches and fruit drinks, like pineapple juice. And it was difficult to work because it was so cold, but you still had to get out of your rack and do your job.
What specifically did you end up doing on board ship within the store's area?
Start out Jack of the Dust, then you go into provisions, you go into clothing, because you had to issue, parkas, foul weather gear, or skivvies or whatever the guys needed. I was in the aviation storekeeper too. We carried a helicopter and sometimes 2 helicopters, so we needed heavy aviation supplies, so that was part of my job. And I spent a lot of time in GSK. GSK is where you had all ship's parts, from a screwdriver to a screw, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I did ship store, which I liked the best because in ship store, I would do the ordering, and we would order like Benrus and Bolivar watches and Hamilton watches and cameras and perfume and sell them in the ship store. Whatever profit we made, which wasn't much, went into a fund, and at the end of the cruise, when we hit port, you'd have some kind of a party. The captain invited the native Eskimos, this is way up in the Arctic, aboard ship to eat in our mess hall. If I'm not mistaken, I think on the menu was spaghetti and meatballs. So the irony of seeing Eskimos in their Eskimo garb and eating spaghetti and meatballs, brings back memories. They enjoyed it, and while they were aboard, we didn't have a ship's doctor, we had a ship's dentist, and the dentist would check them all out and take care of their teeth if need be. We would barter with the Eskimos. They would bring on board these ivory figurines, hand-carved figurines, that they would get from the tusks of the seals and the walruses, and we would barter with them for coffee and sugar, and then the captain would sell these figurines to the crew, and the money that we made into the ship's store fund, so to speak, so that when we got back to port, that money was used to usually have a ship's party. And in one of the pictures, as you can see, there's an Eskimo in a real kayak that would come aboard ship. And again, they were very gentle people. Obviously, we didn't speak Inuit and they didn't speak English, but you could, converse with them through gestures. And they always had a big smile, And they would come along ship, aboard the ship, and try to trade, old shoes or stuff like that, that they could use. Most inspiring item in the Navy was being on the icebreaker in the Arctic at night and seeing the northern lights, the aurora borealis. The captain over the loudspeaker said, "Guys, you got to come topside and take a look at this." And it was a magical show, of the northern lights.
And George, you moved up in rank, and what rank did you achieve while you were on the icebreaker?
I became petty officer third class,
Mhm.
but then you had too many second class, so I took the fleet-wide exam for second class. I passed that, and I had to be transferred. So I spent like 2 years on the Atka, the icebreaker, and then the other 2 years on a USS San Pablo AGS 30, which was a geodetic survey ship. I was second class on the San Pablo, and before getting out, again, I got lucky and I timed the fleet-wide exam just right. Before getting out, I made petty officer first class.
That's quite unusual in 4 years.
Again,
That's great.
a lot has to do with other openings for storekeeper first class or second class. So to that, in that respect, you know, I was fortunate. Yeah.
Could you tell us about the San Pablo, how big of a ship it was?
The San Pablo is, I guess in size, you'd put it with a DE, destroyer escort. So not as big as the destroyer, about the size of a DE. And geodetic survey, the job of the San Pablo was to map the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. So we did a lot of that with our sister ship, the Rehoboth, where you'd trawl together at, 15 knots or something, and they would take soundings and bounce back, and they would map the Atlantic Ocean, primarily with these maps to give it to the submarines, so that when they go in the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, not running into a mountain. You're talking about, the depth of the Atlantic Ocean, at least 5,000 feet. So that's pretty deep. And we even discovered a mountain that is called the San Pablo Mountain somewhere in the South Atlantic. I was fortunate in that respect. The first 2 years I was up north. The second 2 years I was in, a little warmer climate with better home ports.
Where was the ship home ported most
The
of the
home
time?
port of the San Pablo was Philadelphia. I was fortunate there because Boston and Philly, I was able to come home on a 72-hour pass. But being out to sea, San Juan, Puerto Rico was almost like a second home port to us. We would be, that's where we would go when we did the South Atlantic.
And what ports of call did you hit with the San
Well,
Pablo?
besides Greenland and Sassuac, on the San Pablo, Bermuda, Puerto Rico a number of times, England, Germany, and Sweden.